Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The Ministry of Finance in Pakistan has released the Fiscal Risk Statement 2023-24, in which it has highlighted 8 key fiscal risks that can increase the vulnerabilities of Pakistan's economy. And these 8 key fiscal risks include the macroeconomic imbalances, rising debt, guarantees, climate degradation, state-owned enterprises losses, public-private partnership risks, and provincial government's fiscal indiscipline and governance challenges. In this particular statement, the ministry says the inflation rate has been volatile in recent years, influenced by factors which include currency devaluation, energy and food prices in the global market, and the State Bank of Pakistan is actively responding to the increasing inflation by raising the policy rate. This particular statement also says that the government aims to reduce the fiscal deficit by measures that include expanding the tax net, rationalizing subsidies, promoting economic growth. However, the challenge of debt servicing could hinder the reduction of the fiscal deficit. Now, 3 scenarios depicting macroeconomic risks are also simulated to analyze the financial risks associated, recommendations in this regard, and other fiscal risks. The strategies and the mitigation measures are also recommended in this particular statement. To discuss this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad. He is member task force on FBR and tax reforms and former ambassador to WTO. Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Shujat Farooq. He is Chief of Research, Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Dr. Farooq, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On the phone line, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Vaqar Ahmed. He is an economist. Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. If both of you gentlemen in the studio allow me to begin the discussion with Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, who is joining us on the phone line. Dr. Vaqar, by looking at this particular statement by the Ministry of Finance, in which it has highlighted 8 key fiscal risks that can actually increase the vulnerabilities of Pakistan's economy, what is your overall general understanding by looking at it?
Thank you very much for having me. I think one thing that comes out from this analysis by the Ministry of Finance, as well as the recent report by the IMF, is that the current economic growth outlook seems stable, but of course there's no room for macroeconomic slippages. We do understand that the economy, given the scenarios, is expected to remain at a low growth level even for the next 3 to 4 years. But of course, there are areas where, of course, government can really buckle up, and the starting point has to be fiscal prudence. And it's the government's own budget that has to sort of give way for public investment, for greater investments in human capital. On the external side, as you have explained in your introduction, risks do remain. We have a foreign exchange reserve constraint, which is only covering 1.5 months of imports, which means that any fluctuation in the global commodity prices could really jeopardize our current balance of payment standing. And the fact that, of course, inflation is still high, so we cannot, do not have room for any sort of popular expenditure, or even to sort of go slow on tax reform side as well. A tighter monetary policy is expected to continue given the higher inflation. And inflation could only moderate if one continues to build foreign exchange reserves. And of course, with high inflation, one would also need to protect the poorest segment of the population as well, which means that currently the social protection or social safety nets which are in place, their targeting needs to improve as well. One of the points that I could add before I end is that these scenarios which have been presented by the Finance Ministry, I would say that they need to take account of some of the exogenous threats as well, which the country needs to be prepared about. We have seen in the past 2 years that ministry's own estimates did not hold, given that we are seeing recurrent floods every year. The intensity of geopolitical tensions have increased, and it is becoming harder to really predict the commodity prices as well, global commodity prices. With each of these three exogenous issues, every time the government would end up borrowing more, which also crowds out a private investment. So this is something which, of course, the finance ministry would need to be careful about when it sort of accumulates its own buffers to prevent such or to manage such contingencies.
Right. Now, you already mentioned it's very important to increasing foreign exchange reserves. So could you identify those key areas in the immediate term where these could actually be found from?
Yes, I think in the immediate short term, we currently need to demonstrate a strong macroeconomic reform, structural reform agenda, walking the line which we have agreed with the fund, so that this can unlock greater development funding, climate finance, blended finance. In the shorter term, we are not seeing any other sort of inflows coming, although we do understand that SIFC is trying hard to bring in some foreign investment in key sectors, but that'll have to be on top of this. In the medium term, of course, what the new or incoming government could do is really to address those key reforms which IMF has pointed out, which unlock competitiveness of the private sector in agriculture, in industry, so that there's a revival of SMEs, there's a revival of general investor confidence, and given the B2B relationships, the private sector could attract greater foreign investment from abroad. But in the longer term, to build a forex reserve or to build proceeds from exports and FDI, the non-debt inflows as we call them, we would need to have a program such as the early harvest of CPEC. You would need those bigger projects to build your forex reserves more sustainably.
Right. On the particularly when we talk about the debt servicing issue, now this particular statement says the government aims to reduce the fiscal deficit by measures expanding the tax net, rationalizing subsidies and promoting economic growth. Now the challenge of debt servicing could hinder the reduction of the fiscal deficit. Now this particular persistent issue of debt servicing, what are your recommendations regarding that?
Yes. So I think firstly, there has to be a stronger debt management plan. I think we have been late in strengthening the DG debt office. It's good that there is a strong resolve to strengthen this office now, so that we have good and robust debt sustainability analysis, which guides the new political leadership. But the revenue side performance also needs to pick up. It's good to see that the revenue targets are now being achieved, but there is greater room on the revenue side to go after the non-filers, to go after the untaxed sectors, improve the track and trace. And even within the existing resources that government has, there is room to improve public finance management. There's room to improve government's own procurement system, which could lend savings. Provincial governments would need to buckle up. You have a lot of room to improve provincial tax collection. And then, of course, on the customs side, the anti-smuggling efforts must lead to increased revenues coming in from the customs side as well. So all of this should at least provide government some fiscal space so that they can meet their immediate debt obligations, and over time shift the expensive publicly guaranteed debt to cheaper forms of debt.
Right. When we talk about inflation in particular, Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, now the fluctuation in the global oil prices. So how Pakistani authorities can actually navigate through when the international oil prices continue to fluctuate, and also take into account that that particular burden doesn't shift on the shoulders of the common masses?
Yes. So I think when it comes to the global commodity prices, there's little that a price taker, or as we call it, a small open economy like Pakistan could do, given that you have now committed to a market-determined exchange rate with the IMF. So you will have to transfer those prices forward to the consumers. But, you know, there are areas to, of course, address this issue in the medium to longer term. One of the biggest components is the energy sector, or the energy pricing that Pakistani consumers are facing in. So we do understand that energy tariffs have to cover costs, but the new government that comes to office really has to take measures, cost reduction measures, in both electricity as well as gas sectors. And that, in turn, could come in the form of inviting private sector participation in the management of DISCOs, renegotiating the energy deals with independent power plants, addressing transmission losses, expanding renewable energy, which could be cheaper. And I think gradual reduction in the cost of producing and distributing electricity could be then transferred to the consumers. IMF gradually could allow reduction in energy taxes as well, which are currently being faced by the consumers. But in the shorter term, I think I take your point. We will need to provide a buffer to at least the lifeline consumers or the poorest of the poor through targeted transfers under BEST or provincial social protection programs.
Right, Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, when we talk about the performance of the state-owned enterprises, the losses also related to state-owned enterprises are also included in these 8 key fiscal risks. Now, what are your recommendations in order to deal and address these losses which are associated with the state-owned enterprises?
Yes. So I think under the state-owned enterprise triage plan, which we have agreed with the fund as well as the donors, we have highlighted that there are about a little over a dozen SOEs which are throwing up the largest scale of losses. So there's going to be a board and management improvement plan for those SOEs. Some of the SOEs, we understand, there's an advanced stage of privatization list on which these SOEs are being placed. And if in case it will be politically difficult to privatize them, some sort of a divestment plan will be in place. And this has been discussed in the previous 2 meetings of SIFC as well. But I think you're right. In both the past reviews of IMF, this has been a persistent demand from their side that the needle needs to move. They want to see that the loss-making enterprises are put off the books of the Ministry of Finance.
Right. Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, one last very important point, dealing with climate change and its devastating effects, especially on the country's economy, as we saw in the case of the floods back in summer 2022. What are your recommendations?
Yes, I think there's a governance challenge here. While at a federal level, federal government has sort of put forward a strong case in the recent COP meeting held in the UAE. There's a loss and damage fund that has been established as well on the insistence of Pakistan. But what we are not realizing is that most of the implementation, most of the resilient infrastructure that is required to help in adaptation or mitigation in the face of climate change has to be at a provincial level. And provincial governments currently need all the help and the support to really institutionalize the district and tehsil level interventions to strengthen their response. The response has to be from the supply side, where, for example, in the face of floods, we noticed that the tehsil level presence of PDMA's, provincial disaster management authorities, was completely missing. So tehsil administration really needs to be strengthened when it comes to floods or any natural or man-made disasters. On the demand side, the communities have to be trained as well. There has to be a behavioral change intervention as well when fighting the impacts of climate change.
Right, Dr. Vaqar Ahmed, Economist, joining us on the phone line. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, your overall understanding about this particular statement for 2023 and 24 by the Finance Ministry?
Well, they have to prepare it as a part of this is a requirement, legal requirement, as a part of the budgetary statement. I would say that, okay, they have rightly identified these 8 sectors, but personally, we can discuss all of them, but due to lack of time, I think I'll focus on 3 of these. First, inflation. The reason, because in the recent past, inflation has been very high in Pakistan. Despite some control and some stability, it's still very high. It's still 29%. So inflation, there are internal factors as well as external factors. Now, if the commodity, for example, oil prices, they were a few months ago, they were in the early 70s Brent crude per barrel, and now it's slightly risen to 80. But if they go something like 2 years ago, like 110, so that's, we have to be very careful. That's one side. But then there are the commodity prices, because we sometimes import a lot of commodities. And after the Russian-Ukraine war, commodity prices really hit the ceiling. Now they're down comparatively. The FAO, if you look at that index, commodity index, is 10% down, and hopefully it will stay down. So that's another factor. But then inflation also has serious repercussions due to our own domestic policies. One is devaluation. See, we had huge devaluation. If you look at previously from, say, last April, so it was 80% or more. And if that stays in control, that will keep the prices down. So that's about inflation. My second.
So when
sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Regarding devaluation,
yes,
you're of the view, if it remains under control,
yeah,
the inflation could be in check.
Yes.
So what are the key measures, where to start with? You can't, of course, have that particular.
Yes. I mean, the key measures are that we should not let this current account deficit swell too much, because that results in, we have to, the market, there's pressure on Pak rupee. So we under the IMF condition, even otherwise, we have to let it float according to the market rate.
Wasn't there a considerable reduction as far as CAD is concerned recently?
Yes, there was, but that was partially.
That's why we saw that there was the appreciation of value of rupee also.
Partially it was due to import compression, but then that could not be continued for a very long time. First, it was an IMF condition that you have to now slowly ease it. And the other thing is, once you compress imports, your economy doesn't grow. I mean, last year you saw it was 0.29% growth. That's, that means that we are actually considering our population growth and our inflation, etc. We are actually, that means we are squeezing. I think we are contracting our economy.
Right. So, about the external factors regarding inflation, the oil prices and the commodity prices. That the commodity prices that you mentioned actually touched the ceiling because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, right? So these are the international factors. Now, how Pakistani authorities can actually navigate through these fluctuating trends when it comes to the oil prices and commodity prices internationally?
Well, for for oil, in the short term, maybe there's not such a clear solution. But what it is that every country, even Pakistan, is committed to move towards renewables.
So,
That
don't you think
includes-
moving a transition towards renewable energy is going to take considerable time,
No,
effort,
no, no, no.
and
It's
energy?
committed to move towards that in the next 6-7 years by 2030. You know, I mean, to remove, I think it's about 50% or something like that. So you know, it has to move in that. I mean, our big dams are under construction. They should be ready in next 2, 3 years, 4 years. And there's a lot of emphasis on solar and local coal plants, etc. So all these things should make a difference.
Right, Dr. Farooq, your understanding regarding, let's begin with you from inflation now. As Dr. Manzoor Ahmad has given his very comprehensive understanding of the internal and the external factors that have actually added to this particular phenomenon, what's your understanding?
Yeah, I agree to Dr. Manzoor that there are certain, that internal and external factors. For example, that there is good thing that, for example, on external factor, exchange rate is right now quite stable. But that there are certain caveats that government is facing. One is the, that we have certain ceiling on imports, so that's why definitely that will put pressure on inflation. Second, that you are saying that there are certain, that fluctuation in oil prices in international market, but that still our government highly rely on import tariffs. Pakistan and I think Egypt, Dr. Manzoor can correct me, that we are the two highest countries, we highly rely on import tariffs, and that is a major source of government revenue. So that when we rely on the tariffs, so that could be one way that through which we can give the space to the poor peoples as well as the public by lowering these tariffs. But I don't think that right now.
How can those tariffs be lowered, especially when there are economic difficulties and also certain conditions also already there?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why we have limited flexibility that we can reduce the tariff. So that's why, that is the reason that when that, for example, in India, in Bangladesh, inflation is quite low, but still we are facing double-digit inflation over the last 2 years. So that is the external factors. Second, that look at the internal side. Our energy prices are still rising. There is pressure from IMF, and when we will go another IMF program, again there will be pressure that okay, let's increase the prices of oil, gas, electricity, because that there are certain deficits. So still that we have to increase the gas prices by 204%. So definitely, for example, if there are certain fiscal measures as well as restrictive monetary policy measures, these measures will definitely hurt the government efforts. That will again, that we may have to face inflation, I think, in next year again in double digit.
Right, Dr. Farooq, as per your understanding, the second most important, the key fiscal risk which have been mentioned in this report, other than inflation?
Yeah, I think let me to appreciate the Ministry of Finance that they have started certain research. For example, they are preparing macroeconomic outlook, then they have prepared this fiscal statement report. They have correctly highlighted the issues. And that all their emphasis is on the 8th risk. For example, if you look the report, that is basically that we need certain structural reforms. So without that structural reforms, I think it would be quite difficult. Issues are there. For example, we are facing macro imbalances, we are facing internal deficit, external deficit. So I think there are 3 to 4 things that, in my view, that must be focused by the forthcoming government. First is
the last one that you've just mentioned. You're specifically talking about the climate degradation. The last one that has been highlighted in this.
Yeah, climate degradation. Yeah.
Right. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So near me, if you say that which is the big risk, I would say that is basically the macroeconomic imbalances, because that our growth is stagnant. For example, over the last 10 years, China's growth was 8%, India growth was 6.2% on average, Bangladesh growth was 6.5%, and our growth is just fluctuating between 3 to 4%. So until we don't have the stable macroeconomic framework with rise in export, definitely it will put pressure on external imbalances as well as internal imbalances.
Right, there are certain three different scenarios which have been simulated in this particular statement depicting the macroeconomic risks. Now, what's your understanding of all these different scenarios and the possible outcomes out of these?
Yeah, so basically, you know that they are making certain, you know, that fiscal scenarios. So these scenarios basically work under, you know, that low growth, medium growth, and high growth period. And second, you know, that these scenarios work that how, you know, that we can improve certain our tax targets as well as we can reduce the government expenditure. So, for example, you know that right now, for example, over the last, you know, that you can see still we have around 5,000–6,000 billion deficit. So that is that how the government can reduce these fiscal imbalances, that depends on the scenario. So efficient government revenue mobilization, that would be still be a challenge.
Right, to Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, the second most important point after inflation, as per your understanding, that we are already discussing?
I think the second most important point is the public debt. See, currently our public debt is 75% of our GDP. Various studies show that when a country, developing, especially a developing country like Pakistan, if this ratio exceeds 60%, then you know you are in dangerous territory. It could default. We just saw this, you know, we just went through this scenario a few months ago. And in fact, our own law, it says that we should not have more than 58%. So we have to somehow reduce this public debt. And public debt, how do you reduce it? One, you know, you raise your income, and the second is you lower your expenditure. So we have to work on both sides to do that. And to lower our, obviously to increase our income, it is through our current tax GDP ratio is, you know, about 10%. Ordinarily for developing countries, it's about 15%. Our potential determined by the World Bank, etc., is that Pakistan could raise about 22%. And there are areas where we are raising almost nothing. So we can do that and increase that. And then there's tax expenditure. Tax expenditure means that there are too many exemptions that we give out. So we can close those loopholes. That's on the raising income. And then the other side is tax expenditure. I mean, you know, general government expenditure. And you know, we almost have done nothing. I mean, it's still rising. For example, you look at state-operated SOEs, enterprises. I mean, recently the interim government has tried and strongly at least two major sectors, for example, PIDE and steel mills, which have been causing lots of loss, and they've done all the groundwork, and hopefully the new government can pick up from there and implement those. So yeah,
right. As you already mentioned, of the second most important key fiscal risk happens to be the debt. Now, debt servicing, the cost of it. Also, when we talk in terms of the external debt. Now, there are certain recommendations made in this particular statement also. It is important for the government to achieve and maintain a longer average time to maturity of its domestic as well as the external debt.
Yeah.
This means that the government should issue debt with longer maturities,
yeah,
which would reduce the frequency of the debt rollovers and decrease the refinancing risks,
yes,
in line with the current medium-term debt strategy.
Yes, yes, that's what it should be, ideally. But it's not very easy because Pakistan has been going through a very difficult time. If we float a bond for, say, 20, like US or something, they won't even offer 50% of the value because nobody's sure. Maybe they can, in short term, they can give you, a better price for your bonds, etc. So it should be ideally that, but for the time being, we had these difficulties. We couldn't do that.
When we specifically talk of debt servicing, is it actually that very actual price of the debt that has to be repaid?
Oh, the interest for the time being. Interest.
How to deal with that particular aspect of it?
It's not easy, but many countries, they try for some restructuring. Maybe Dr. Shujat, being an economist, would be in a better position to explain that. But that's one thing. It's not easy, but government has been looking into that option.
Right, Dr. Farooq, your understanding of this particular debt servicing issue, both on the external and the internal domestic side, and then the actual debt and the interest rate over that also.
So right now, you know that this debt is a big issue because this is a big elephant in the room. Because right now 80% of our debt is percentage of GDP, and if you look the composition of debt, 30% is the external debt share. So definitely this 37% impose pressure on our exchange rate, as well as, you know, that refining risk. You have mentioned that how we can, you know, that right now, for example, 52 to I think 55% is the interest payment of our budget. So that is, you know, that a big certain portion of budget that goes to debt financing.
Debt servicing, 37% right now that we do have.
Yeah. So that is a big, you know, that. So how we can tackle that, you know, that firstly we require an efficient, you know, that debt management office that plan the debt servicing for the next, you know, that 10 to 15 years, that how we have to manage that debt.
How,
and you know,
how do we do that?
Yeah, how we have to do.
Okay, so we do establish that debt, efficient debt servicing.
Efficient, you know, that debt management, you know, that framework. That
but how to do that? I mean, what are the key recommendations in that?
So now there are two ways. For example, one is the internal debt, you know, that, and the other is external debt. On internal debt, you know, that still right now government is a big borrower from the, you know, that commercial banks. So an efficient government with reducing, you know, that government expenditures, that can help, you know, that internal reduce the debt borrowing from the internal sources, and definitely it will create the leverage that for the private sector. So definitely there will be more investment. So I think government have to reduce its internal debt financing from the private banks. On the external side, you know, that that is quite, you know, that difficult in short term, you know, that because it all depends on certain investment confidence, and right now, you know, that we can sell certain bonds in the international market and through international bond market, but that is quite difficult through which we can do that.
Right. The third important point, as per your understanding, Dr. Manzoor.
Third important point is, I think, climate change. Because, you know, just that floods that came, the losses were estimated at about $15 billion, and reconstruction was another $15 billion.
So overall, it was $30 billion.
So you know, so we should have, we should be more prepared, because we are one of the 10 most vulnerable countries. So we, whatever, I mean, we have recently done this national disaster management framework. We have prepared. We have, you know, we are internally we are trying to, our own emissions we are trying to reduce. So there are various steps we are taking. But you know, one of
don't we have already less than 1% of the emissions?
No,
I mean,
that's
what
globally.
impact it's going to have, even if we try to reduce even less than 1%?
Yes, but,
I mean,
you know, in our own country,
show our commitment towards going towards the lesser as there could be. But what about that impact because of the world at large, because of that developed world?
I think that's, for the time being, I'll leave it out, because it's a little bit outside the scope of this particular discussion, because the whole world is doing something, but we cannot really push them. We have to see what we can do ourselves. I mean, at least in our own country, we have committed that we will have at least 30% vehicles electric, you know, so that to reduce emissions. So more 60% renewable energy, things like that we're doing. But the more important thing is to be prepared. For example, every time we have these floods, we are not really prepared. I mean, China used to have on this Shaanxi River, what's the name of that river? They used to have these frequent floods. And then they said, you know, you cannot get rid of these floods by building dams, etc. You have to live with these floods. So these floods will come, you store that water, you make these reservoirs, etc. And you know, through various means, you can reduce the impact. And we have to do that. And that, I mean, we have several reports, and I think one of the best was prepared in 2010 by Justice Manzoor was heading that commission. And we need to implement those. We have not done that.
So what were those recommendations?
Our recommendations was that look at what China has done there, do the same thing, make catchment areas, so that you can store those flood waters. They just and there were many things like that. But I think they had taken all the best studies, all the best experts, and come up with those.
Right. Now, this particular statement also mentions the fact that for a resilient recovery, specifically when you talk about that, particularly that flood that came in 2022. Yes. For a resilient recovery, the government has worked on a comprehensive 4RF strategy: resilient recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction framework. We saw there was a lot of talk about this particular when it was presented at the international level also, aiming to reduce the adverse impacts of climate change and natural hazards for Pakistan's economy, particularly the agriculture sector and its population.
Yeah.
The implementation, okay, so we framed this particular 4RF. Yes. Now, the implementation of it, the 4 different areas: resilient, yes, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction framework, how to go about it?
One thing is obvious, that doing this huge task is beyond our capability. We can do something, but the international community had agreed, I think in Geneva last year, was it? Last year, to give something like $10 billion. And nothing much has materialized. So, we could do that. I mean, some of those things could be activated.
It hasn't been materialized. Also, there were certain flash appeals also made by the United Nations with that particular flood in Pakistan. But the pledges were made, the commitment was not materialized later on. Okay, if this particular trend continues, what needs to be done internally? Won't it require a lot of finances for Pakistan in order to indigenously go about this particular 4RF program?
I think Pakistan has to give more attention than it has done so far. I mean, this was always left, we'll see when it comes. But some more resources, cutting down, for example, if you cut down our wasteful expenditure on the state-operated enterprises, and put some of that money there, that could already be a big step forward.
Right. Dr. Farooq, now already we were discussing as to the issue of debt and debt servicing, right? Now the recommendations, which I already took the view of Dr. Manzoor Ahmad also, which has been mentioned here in this particular statement. It is important for the government to achieve and maintain a longer average time to maturity on its domestic and external debt. Could you shed a little bit of light on this?
Yeah, you know that as we have mentioned that right now, our debt servicing capacity, that is quite limited. So we know that we highly rely on internal debt as well as external debt. For example, on average in 1 year, we require around $20 to $25 billion to finance our government expenditures as well as our export. So definitely, that pressure is rising due to interest payments and due to that deficit. So that's why we require certain long-term maturity, that to sustain this debt. So that's why that there is efficient, that if we would have a debt efficient management system, a good framework that can help us. That rescheduling is not possible because that we are already that is quite serious matter. So over the, for example, next 10 years we can issue certain that bonds that can build the confidence of the foreign investment. SIFC is also doing the that certain efforts. So for example, you can see that in this year again we are achieving certain FDI. So definitely if there is certain more FDI, then we get more remittances, then there is certain boost on exports. So definitely it will maintain our reserves, it will build the investor confidence. So SIFC, these are elements that would help us to build a stable exchange rate, as well as they can
so it's naturally going to have an impact on the fiscal deficit also, and reduction in that.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
So your understanding, Dr. Manzoor, when we talk about the promises and prospects of SIFC, when we talk about dealing with this particular phenomenon of fiscal deficit in the immediate terms?
You see, what the main thing what SIFC did was to expedite decision making. our problem has been that it takes very, very long time for anything, any decision to be taken. And if you look at the last 6 months since SIFC became effective, you saw a lot of progress in various things which were held up for years and years, and investment started coming in. I hope, I mean, this could be in the longer term through Board of Investment or something. But the big problem that was that we procrastinated. I mean, we just sat on decisions that could move quicker.
So state-owned enterprises, another key fiscal risk that actually can increase the vulnerability. You already mentioned the caretaker government actually had some initiatives done, particularly PIA and steel mills. What else is required on this front?
I mean,
especially towards the loss-making state-owned enterprises.
Yeah, I mean, the two things that interim government took on was PIA and the steel mills, and hopefully, they have already, I think, taken some decision about the huge land that steel mill has to make it into export processing zone, and hopefully they can get it going. I mean, and that's one thing. And sorry, what was the question? Is
I mean, how to go about it other than PIA and steel mills?
Oh yes, I mean there is,
especially when we talk about the loss-making state-owned enterprises in general.
The big losses are coming from this energy sector, and I think they have been able to do many things in the energy sector already. I mean, they've reduced the losses, and they have tried to make the prices more according to the cost basis. I mean, rather than subsidizing them. So these were the two major issues, but and made losses. And then the problem is, I think some of the provinces, they should, for example, these the discos, distribution companies, etc. For example, the losses are in some provinces. So maybe it will be much better after this, especially after the the 18th Amendment, to negotiate with the provinces, hand them over, so that they feel more responsible to control their losses.
Right, Dr. Shujat, your understanding regarding the state-owned enterprises which are loss-making enterprises.
Yeah, you know that there are two sorts of losses. One is the direct losses that Dr. Manzoor has highlighted. For example, biggest loss that is coming from railway, that is coming from the energy. For example, there are, I think, last year, the WAPDA losses are around 976 billion, and primarily they are due to certain subsidies given in various sectors of that power sector. Another thing that is basically the loan and guarantees that government has also committed, and these loans and guarantees are around 10% of the GDP. That is a huge amount. For example, the last year I have read the report, they are around 3.5 trillion these guarantees, and around 2.5 that is coming from the power sector. So I think in the future, one way could be the public-private partnership. But again, that government is taking the certain guarantees whenever we are signing certain agreements on the PPP mode in NHA, in power sector. Other way, I think the only way could be that is the privatization. For example, there is the discos. So ideally, the model of the discos, for example, 2.5 trillion guarantees and around near to 1 trillion losses that is coming from the WAPDA, that is just totally privatized the disco. For example, ISCO's losses are just around below 5 billion, and on the other hand, PESCO losses are around 230 billion and even more than 230 billion. So again, that here government role, that is quite important, because these discos that are still administered by the that power sector and government officials. So that's why I think efficient government concept that comes here.
There is another one, the provincial government's financial indiscipline, right? What do you make out of it? How this particular area as a fiscal risk could be managed?
That perhaps we require another NFC award. and second, we require another PFC award. You know that after 18th Amendment, we have the NFC award, and this NFC award empowered the provinces financially. You know that right now, federal government that is quite weakened in terms of financial, and provinces, they, you know that they have huge resources. They don't have any liability. They don't have any you know that guarantees in terms of, you know, that SOEs, enterprises, liabilities, debt management, guarantee, macro imbalances. So I think we require another PFC award through which it requires certain efficient utilization of resources at the grassroots level.
What would be the contours of that broadly? If you could shed a little bit of light on that PFC award.
So basically, you know that right now, so basically the concept of the 18th Amendment was that let's empower the provinces. But you know that basically the concept was that let's devolute the powers from the federal government to provincial government. But now these powers have been centered at the provincial level, for example, in Lahore, in Karachi, in in Peshawar and Quetta. Still, you know that, for example, if you look the poverty composition, still you know that southern Punjab, that is lagging behind in terms of infrastructure, in terms of poverty. So concept was that the deprived areas that require more resources. So through this Provincial Finance Commission, you know that resources will definitely diverted to these remote areas. So again, the concept of local government, you know that through local government, efficient government that have financially empowered as well as administrative powered, that will definitely, you know, that improve the service delivery.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, do you agree with this recommendation that has been put forth by Dr. Shujat when it comes to dealing with the provincial governments in discipline? That happens to be a key fiscal risk.
I think it's very obvious, and especially in terms of raising of tax revenues. I mean, they're still not 1%. You know, it's very low. I mean, you know, for example, agriculture is the subject, and agriculture, you know, whoever gets a certain income beyond a certain level, they should be taxed. And it's not for the federal government; it has to be through the provincial government. And also, I mean, whatever extra money came in various ways, that was spent on hiring more people, you know, just whether they needed or not, opening more universities everywhere, every district, 1, 2, 3, 4. There should be more discipline on that. Yes.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Member Task Force on FPR and Tax Reforms, former Ambassador to World Trade Organization also. Thank you very much for being with us on the show. Dr. Shujat Farooq, Chief of Research at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.